Hi, thank you for joining us again for Mom Talk. Today we're going to be talking about our birthing experiences. Jessica, can you tell us something about?
Well, I don't really have the typical experience as far as pregnancy or birth goes. About 30 weeks, I kind of missed an appointment. Like, I was supposed to see my doctor about 30 weeks and 31-ish, and I had to, there was, appointment error, it happens, so I wasn't going to be able to see him until closer to 32 weeks. And I was at work, and I started feeling just really, really bad. Like, I can't even really explain, what felt wrong. I just felt just achy and sore and just bad. And I was working at a bank in a grocery store at the time, so I went over and I took my blood pressure at the pharmacy, and it was a little elevated. So I called my doctor, and they're like, well, why don't you just come in, and, we'll do a little bit of monitoring and just, make sure you're okay. So I was like, okay, so I went home, and I told my husband, he was like, okay. And he was kind of like, we're going to go to the emergency room, and we're going to sit there for 8 hours, and, they're going to see you for 5 minutes, and they're going to send you home. I was like, well, whatever, we need to do. He's like, okay. So we go. I didn't pack anything at all. We get to the hospital. I was in the waiting room, maybe 15 minutes. They take me back, take my blood pressure, and they're like, oh, that's kind of high, and take me back to L&D to monitor me, and I was having a little bit of contractions. And they do, I forget what it's called, they check your urine for proteins.
Protein, yeah.
They did the hour one, and after the hour catch, the doctor came in, and she's like, you might as well just get comfortable. She's like, you're not going home. I was leaking protein really badly, and she's like, you have preeclampsia. So I was about 32 weeks, and I got put on medical hospital rest. I went up to the antepartum unit, and it was around Christmas time, the beginning of December, and I got laid out on hospital bed rest, just monitoring my blood pressure every couple hours. I had to send my husband home to get me clothes because we had nothing. I didn't have a pregnancy backpack. I was rolling along. I was 31 weeks, 32 weeks, no big deal. So I sent my husband home to get me things, and I was 33 weeks and 6 days. And my blood pressure that morning, it just kind of kept creeping up. And my doctor had told me, he's like, well, if it gets to be 170 over 90, he's like, that's it. He's like, I'm calling it, like, you're going to have a baby. And an hour later, I had a little pain right here, and I mentioned to my nurse, and she took my blood pressure, and my blood pressure was 170 over 91. And her eyes got a little big, and she was like, I'm going to go get the doctor. And I was like, okay. I didn't know what these numbers meant. And the doctor came in, he's like, you need to call your husband. You're having the baby tonight. So they took me in, and I had to have a semi-emergency C-section. I don't know if it's actually considered that or not. I had the epidural. I laid down, and I immediately started having a panic attack on the table. Just couldn't breathe, started screaming that I could feel them. Like, I swear to my husband this day that I'm missing a kidney, because I was like, they stole an organ while they were in there. I mean, just screaming bloody murder. I just see the doctors just step back, and they're like, we're not touching her anymore until, and the anesthesiologist goes, gasping.
Super down now, right?
The only thing I remember for the rest of the thing is orange. Like, I saw the color orange. And my husband was like, yeah, you were just...
That's a very pretty pose.
So they got Lily out. She was, like I said, she's born 33 weeks and 6 days. She weighed 4 pounds, 12 ounces. I didn't get to see her for, I was in recovery for about 18 hours, and then they took me to postpartum. So she was a little over a day old before I got wheeled down to the NICU, and I got to see her. She was a week old before I got to hold her. Then she had a 24-day stay in the NICU, and we got to bring her home on New Year's Eve of 2010. So she's doing great. Though, like I said, she had minimal health issues. They gave me the steroid shot when I was at the hospital, so they matured her lungs a little bit. They just had to get her to learn to eat on her own and breathe on her own and all of that. But so not exactly the ideal birth experience. You had C-sections?
I had C-sections as well. Pregnancy was great. I was 41 weeks pregnant, and my doctor was like, great, you're 41 weeks, let's get the baby out and do induction time. Okay, sounds good to me. I didn't ask any questions. I wasn't ready to be induced, and I went into the hospital. My husband and I, we had a great time, had some Chinese food, went into the hospital, prepared to have this baby, and they did the Cervidil through the night, caused some menstrual cramping, that's about it. And then in the morning, they started my Pitocin, dropped the baby's heart rate. They, of course, put me on my side, did some oxygen, very, very quickly rushed me into the OR. And with Sebastian, I remember I didn't have an epidural in place because I was planning on going natural. So they did the spinal block, and they sit you up on the table, and I just remember like this quick pain, and then it was like almost like getting a lightning strike in my back, and then all of a sudden like my one leg went and it was numb, and then my other leg went and it was numb, and I just remember that being the weirdest feeling. And then they're like, okay, just you're gonna fall back, and it was like it was such an odd it was such an odd feeling. And I just remember, being very out of it, and of course I was very nervous, and my husband was, there looking at me with his big eyes and his mask on, and this was not the birthing experience that we had prepared. I was going to be natural, I was going to sit on some balls and roll around and breathe, like, they teach you the birthing class with the ice in your hand, and you're like, that does not help. I don't know if it does in real labor, but anyway, that wasn't our birth, that wasn't the plan. That was the hardest part to comprehend. This was not the plan. And they got him out, and I remember them bringing him to me, and I'm like, he has red hair? He had blood on him. He does not have red hair. He has blonde hair, and I'm an educated woman. It's not like I couldn't have figured this out myself. I'm a nurse, but I was just out of it, and, so they bring me my little redhead baby, and I give him some kisses, and then they wheel him off, and my husband, that was the plan. I always told him from day one, I said, no matter what happens, I said, you stay with the baby. I said, if they switch my baby at the hospital, you're in trouble. Yeah. So he went with the camera, and I was all by myself in the OR getting stitched up, and he went with the baby and videotaped it, and you can, hear him on the video camera the whole time, and the nurse is like, okay, well, you can go back to your wife. I'm not allowed to leave the baby. She'll kill me. And, he's like videotaping everything. So I was like, I don't want to miss this minute of his life, Yeah. So finally, I went into the recovery room, and my mom met me there, and she kind of, was able to calm me down a little bit. My husband was the baby and got to do his first bath and stuff. And then they rolled me back to the room about an hour and a half later, and then I was able to hold him and nurse him for the first time. I had a really hard time nursing him, and I think it was because we didn't get enough skin-on-skin contact at the beginning. Overall, the C-section was great. I didn't have any pain. I was up and walking the next day. I loved the Foley catheter. I was like, sweet, I can drink as much as I want. I don't have to get up and go to the bathroom every 5 minutes. I ring a little bell. Everybody brings stuff to me. The next day I rolled my little carriage down the hall and got my own juice. I had a great recovery. I can't say anything bad about that, but it just wasn't the experience that I was hoping for. So with the second one, my second pregnancy with Christian, I decided that I was going to do a VBAC. I found a doctor here locally that was willing to do it because there was only like 2 of them. And she was an amazing doctor. She had a VBAC herself, a vaginal birth after cesarean. And the whole pregnancy, that was the plan. Again, I was going to go natural. I was going to have this baby. I was going to drop. We were going to do everything possible. And again, we're sitting at 41 weeks. And nothing is happening. I'm not dilating, I'm not dropping, no signs of labor, no signs of anything. So at that point, we had a little scare with my baby's heart rate again, that it was running a little low. Not terribly low, but about 102, 103, which, obviously should be in the, over 110. They did stress tests and all that, and they said, well, what do you want to do? Because with being a VBAC candidate, I wasn't eligible for Pitocin, Cervidil, and some other drugs to induce again. So at that point, we decided to go ahead and schedule the C-section. So my second time around, I ended up with a scheduled C-section, which, let me tell you, was way better than the emergency C-section. We woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning. We said, cool, we're going to go have a baby. We threw some clothes in we had our stuff ready to go. Went to the hospital and joked around with the nurses and, had a good time. We were prepared. Everything was nice and relaxed. I asked on the table, can you check me one more time to see if I'm dilated, please? Dilated. It was just a really nice, relaxed atmosphere. So they roll us into the OR, and, I get another spinal, and I'm laying down, and my husband and I were joking around and stuff, and they're starting the C-section, everything's going great, and all of a sudden I'm like, hey, my fingertips are going numb. My hand, my shoulders. Hey, anesthesiologist, my jaw's going numb. Do something about this. It's not supposed to be happening. I was just worried it was going to start moving up. Luckily, it stopped at the jawline, but he was like, shoot, it's going to be okay. A little bit of medication right there. And of course, then I'm like, I'm going to throw up. So, of course, on the table, and I'm,
you can't.
I'm going to throw up. So then they give me some medicine. Okay, calm down. And I remember looking at my husband and just really relaxed about the whole thing then. And I was like, honey, you have to do something to keep me awake. I don't want to miss the baby's birth. Like, keep me awake. And so he's like, okay, well, I'll just tell you about school. And he starts talking about mechanical engineering and blah, blah, blah. I said I want to stay awake. So how about them Kardashians? Like, that's the only thing I remember. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about Kim Kardashian here on the table while we are birthing our child. Yeah. Like, the first thing he's going to hear is Kim Kardashian as he comes out of the womb. How's that for a life start, right? Anyway, but so then again, they took him out of the OR because it was too cold. But this time, the doctor knew I wanted to get immediate skin-on-skin contact, so they stitched me up real good, and then I got out to the recovery room, and this time they brought me the baby in the recovery room, and I was able to take down my top and get him on there and able to nurse him, and I would say 15 minutes after he was born, he was nursing, because that's how quickly they brought him to me. So it was a better experience, and again, no pain, no discomfort. I was up and walking the next day, and the only thing with the C-sections, which nobody tells you, and I get extremely itchy when they give you, because they put a little bit of morphine in your back.
Yeah.
And so I itched like a crazy person. With my first son, my nose was so red because he was born 3 days before Christmas, and on all the pictures I have a chapped nose, and I was like putting lotion on it because I just itched and itched and itched like a crazy person. And same thing again, I itched, and I threw up like crazy from the epidural or from the spinal. And I remember this poor lady, being a volunteer, they must have stories to tell. But she was coming in with my big old flowers, and I'm holding the baby, and she walks in the door. I'm like, throw the baby down, and I'm throwing up, and then the call light's going off, and the lady from did you need something? Did you need something? Did you need something? And the lady's coming in, I'm throwing up. I'm throwing up, and the volunteer's like, it's okay, you're gonna be fine. And the nurse comes running in the room, and it was okay, but it was kind of a funny, when the pregnant lady or the lady that just got out of surgery rings the bell, just come to the room. Don't say, what did you need?
She might not be able to talk.
So, other than the terrible recovery of throwing up and itching like a crazy person, it's not bad. Terrible, terrible stomach pains though. Like, definitely take everything that they prescribe for gas and bowel movements and all that, because it is uncomfortable when you do get to eat again, and quite uncomfortable, honey.
Well, my son, I had a scheduled trip to go on a weekend, like, little vacation with my grandparents, because my uncle was getting married, and we were having his reception. And I wasn't too happy about going, but my whole family was going to be there. They're like, no, you need to go, you need to go. So I was like, okay, I was, a week out before I was due. And so my doctor was like, yes, just make sure, go to a hospital or give us a call if you feel anything. I'm like, all right. So immediately when we get down there, we're sitting on one of the hotel beds all talking, about ready to go to dinner, and I stand up and my pants are wet. And I think I peed myself or my water broke. I don't know which one, because it wasn't like soaking wet. And I asked my family, I'm like, okay, did my water break or did I just pee myself?
Yeah, you don't know that far along.
And they're like, well, do you want to call it the doctor? And I'm like, well, maybe I just peed myself. I'm like, no. And they're like, yeah, let's go out to dinner first, and then you can call me out to dinner. So we go out to dinner, and of course they take like 2 hours to eat. And I'm like thinking, am I having a baby? I just didn't know. And so finally we went back to the hotel room, and I called the hospital, and they're like, yeah, you need to go to the hospital. I was like, do I go to the one here or do I drive back home? They're like, well, you can drive back home. So we drove 3 hours in the middle of the night back home, get to the hospital. They did a cervical test, and they're like, yes, your water did break. But I wasn't having any contractions whatsoever. And so I'm like, okay, so they were going to monitor me, and they're like, if you don't have contractions at 8 o'clock in the morning, we'll induce you. So 8 o'clock comes, and they're like, okay, you don't have any contractions, you're dilating, we need to start inducing you. So I'm like, okay. So they asked, do you want anything? I'm like, no, I'm not feeling anything. I'm okay for now. And they're like, okay. And so probably about mid-afternoon, I started feeling cramps and, labor, and I was like, okay, juice me up. And so then friends started coming in, and they wanted to stay. And I said, yeah, for a couple people that they could be there for the birthing because I didn't have anyone else there. And it ended up I had 20 people in the delivery room. So
They allowed that?
yeah, they
Wow.
and it was so funny because there was I had a vaginal birth, and what they don't tell you is the doctor really doesn't do anything. It was all the nurse.
Jessica could probably tell you.
Really?
Yeah, the nurse was there, and she was like, okay, when it was time to push, then the doctor came, but while we were just waiting there, and for the first half hour of pushing, the doctor was sitting on a couch talking with my
Playing on his phone.
friends.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm like, I was thinking, well, you guys want some popcorn? And then I'll tell you about when you're pushing that you do fart.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was a little embarrassing when there's all these people, and I'm like,
That's quite
got to
funny.
joke. And so, but all in all, it took about an hour to push. My son came out. They put him on my chest, and I just remember looking down. I'm like, "Oh, you're so beautiful!" And then all of a sudden, they just grabbed him, and I'm like, I looked at him like, "What are you guys doing?" And then I realized he wasn't crying. And so they were like, we need to take your son now. And so they took him, and I just remember, no one's telling me anything. Like, what's going on? What's going on? And they started wheeling him out, and I told my aunt, I was like, you need to go with him. What's going on? It wasn't until about an hour later before one of the doctors came in and said, we might need to life flight your son up to the
Oh my
hospital. And he wasn't breathing. And what happened was he had, when my water broke, he inhaled my fluid, and it sat in his lungs too long, and so he got an infection in his lungs, so he couldn't breathe. And so, all in all, luckily they got him under control. He was on 100% oxygen for about 16 hours, but they wouldn't let me see him, and they had to stitch me up a little bit down there. And I just remember they wouldn't let me out of the bed. They were holding me down. They actually had to give me something to calm me down because I was I wanted to go see him. I didn't know what was going on. And finally, the next morning I was able to hold him, but he was still all hooked up to all these wires and stuff like that. But I mean, he's okay now. I mean, he's great, but that was horrible experience. And then with my daughter, completely different. She was, again, we were going to do a vaginal. My husband's in the military. He got orders to be deployed on the day of our due date.
No.
And so
Are y'all give us an extra week?
yeah, and so I called up my doctor. I was like, look, what? I was 3 weeks out. They were like, well, we don't always do this unless there's an emergency. I'm like, seriously, my husband's not going to miss his birth. I was like, he needs to be there. He's, he can't, if he denies orders, he'll go to jail. So he has to go.
Yeah.
But I want him here. And so they were like, okay, yeah, we'll induce you. And so that was cool. So they brought us in. They didn't quite give me the Pitocin. They did something where, I don't know, they stuck some tab.
Cervidil.
Yeah. Anyways, and so I went all day. I would start going into labor, and then I wouldn't. And then I would go into labor, and I wouldn't. We did this all day long, up and down, up and down. I was exhausted. And so finally my doctor's like, are you ready to have this baby or not? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, all right, we're going to put you out to the Pitocin. And I was like, all right, give me the epidural first, because I wasn't going to have this thing. No, it's just hook me up. And so as soon as they gave me the epidural and the Pitocin, I fell asleep. And I woke up, and I'm like, oh God, I gotta push. And I was trying to get my husband, so he was sleeping, and I didn't know this, but he had a huge fever. But he didn't want to tell the doctors or the nurses because, yeah. And so I couldn't get him to wake up. And then I was all hooked up to these wires, so I couldn't reach for the buzzer. And I'm like, you're trying to move. And I'm like, oh God, I just need to push. But all in all, I pushed for a half an hour. She came out. She was perfect. And that was such a better experience than the first one. So
That's good. I had 2 C-sections. The first time I wanted to have the natural birth, no medicine, no nothing. I wanted to try to do it. And I wish somebody had told me, if if the doctor doesn't feel right for you, then you need to switch. Which somebody did tell me, but they didn't really no, you need to switch.
Yeah.
You know, and because the doctor I had, she didn't seem to really push natural birth so much. She was like, you can try. You know, she wasn't like, you know, she was more like.
My first doctor laughed when I told her I was going to go naturally.
She did that to me too. My doctor did that to me, and she actually told me, what was it that she said? It was really like, I don't even remember, but I was just kind of like taken back by what she had said to me. Yeah, but like for me, see, I had C-sections also, like you, and the first one was an absolutely horrible experience. But the way I went into labor, my water broke, and I went to the bathroom to pee, and all of a sudden I was like, why is there blood? You know what I mean? And I didn't know if my water broke or not because, you know, you're sitting on the bathroom and you're like, you know, you can't feel it. You can't feel the difference. So I didn't feel the difference. But, so I called the doctor and they made me go into the hospital to check and see, and they did some kind of strip test, and they're like, you have a little bit of amniotic fluid in you, so they immediately, you know, made me stay there. And I wish I hadn't gone immediately in to the hospital because they start the timer basically when you get there. And it's like, you have 24 hours to have this baby or we're cutting it out. Awesome. But I wanted completely natural birth for the first one. No medicine, no nothing. I was just going to breathe it out. And it just didn't happen that way. You know, I walked around the hospital. I did everything I could to try to, you know, I had massages going and all sorts of stuff to try to make me progress. And she wasn't coming. So, like hours later, they said, okay, we're going to have to induce you. So they gave me Pitocin. And the moment they connected me to that, I felt immediate pain. Like, no one warned me that inducing means severe pain. At least for me. I was like I would move. I remember I was just like, I couldn't go I couldn't get away from the pain. I would go to the bathroom and I would sit there and I would cry, and I just, you know, it was a lot. So I finally caved, like 3 hours later of going through that, 3 or 4 hours later, and I said, give me epidural. So they gave me the epidural, and the doctor came in, and the anesthesiologist came in, and he gave me the epidural, and I told him, I love you. I literally did. I took a picture with him,
awesome.
like, I'm going to look at you and say, he saved me. Yeah, he was awesome. But see, I don't know, like, after they gave me the epidural, I finally was able to relax. You know, I could still feel pain, but it wasn't as severe. So the next morning, Desiree, my first, she's getting a fever and she needed to get out, and I wasn't progressing. I got to 5 centimeters, so they finally said, nothing's happening. She's getting to where we got to get her out. So I ended up having to go into an emergency C-section, and I was terrified because it's surgery. You're getting cut open, and you don't know what's going to happen. And I just remember I felt very like a horrible mother for not being able to have my daughter naturally, for giving her the medication, and for now getting her sliced out of me. You know what I mean? Like, I felt horrible. So they wheeled me into the operating room. Of course, when you have a C-section, you're just laying there. You can't move your arms, you can't move your legs. You're just at their mercy. There's a curtain over you. My husband's there, like, everything's gonna be okay. They're gonna get her out, yada, yada, yada. And then when I first heard her cry, that was like, okay, this is worth it. But it was hard because they show her to you for like a few seconds, and then she's gone. Because they take her to get, you know, bathed and all sorts of stuff, but my husband went with her, so you're there in the operating room. They're stitching you up completely by yourself. They don't let anybody else come in with you to try to, you know, support you. And they just wheeled her away, and I'm just like, I'm missing her first bath. I'm missing her everything. Everything. So, you know, I felt horrible. And she ended up in the NICU, which was really, you know, traumatic to me because, well, we had her there in our room the first night. And then the next day they said, well, we tested her and her vitamin levels were low and a bunch of random stuff. And we were like, okay, so that she needs to go in the NICU. So they took her to the NICU, and going in to see her there was like absolutely horrible. You know, she's got the tubes coming out of her. I have no belly, like, you know, the umbilical that falls off. We had no fall off. They just had the tubes going into her belly button. And, you know, you carry her, and you don't want to move them because any little thing, and the monitor starts beeping, and it was just really hard. And I just remember crying when I left the hospital without her. It was like the worst thing ever. But I would try to go see her as much as I could. But my second pregnancy was much better. I switched doctors, which the first one I wasn't fond of. I switched hospitals. I was gonna try for VBAC, but I had preeclampsia, so I had to go ahead and have a C-section. But I was in a much better emotional state, so I didn't end up.
prepare for it when it's planned like that.
Yes, I was definitely. If I could do it over again, I would have just tried to do it natural, and then okay, well, if I can't, then C-section. No Pitocin, no epidural, just C-section.
I told my doctor that as well with the VBAC.
Yeah.
I said, I don't want to go through all that again.
No.
It's either going to do it or it's not. But
Yeah, that was my mistake to try and be inducing. I did not like that. But anyway, lots of conversation today. I want to thank y'all for joining us for Mom Talk, and we hope to see you next week. Well, we can't see you next week, sorry. We hope you join us next week, and thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope y'all have a great day.